But that's an interesting message. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
something new that they incorporated into when you do a recording, so people know, I guess, that it is being recorded. So we lost. Did we lose Brian?
oh, we lost Brian.
We lost Brian.
You clicked the wrong button.
Is that what it was?
Probably.
Yeah. Does it automatically like boot you out? Is that?
No, it shouldn't have. But let's see when he comes back in here. So
Charles, there's a buzzing noise. Just something's causing that. There he is. He's back.
is he back in? There he is. Okay. Let me make him a co-host again.
Brian, you need to unmute Brian, and you need to get on video. There you go. Unmuting.
There you go.
All right. Was it something I said? Jeez. It's a little new to be getting kicked. Usually I wait until about halfway through the presentation, then people start kicking me out. That's how I know it's working well. So, all right. I'm going to go and attempt to share my screen again. How that goes. If y'all could let me know if that's working right.
It's working, yes.
All right. Very
Looks good.
All right. Good deal. Well, thank you everybody for attending this evening. We're here to talk about what has become one of the hottest topics in the technology space right now, which is really IT security and then of course some of the what ifs that are associated with that, which I'll leave to the attorneys after I'm done. I want to give just a quick and brief overview of some practical IT security steps that affect your practice. Now, one of the things that I've seen so many people do when they do presentations about security is they basically get up and they scare people to death and then here, buy this thing. And we're not going to be doing any of that this evening. This is really about what are some practical, actionable steps that you can take to protect your practice. What I tell people all the time is I'm not going to make your business, your practice completely impenetrable. I'm just going to make you less attractive than everybody else. And that's really what we're talking about doing here. What are those practical steps? So first of all, let's talk about just defining what do we even mean by IT security, because it's going to look differently for you than it is for a coffee shop. It's going to look different for you than it is for Chase Bank. And so what does it look like in terms of healthcare practices? What are the practical steps, or excuse me, what is the working definition that we're going to have? First of all, by the way, when you want to know something, what do? You go to the source of all knowledge, which is of course Wikipedia. Now, as a rule, I don't read from slides. I hate reading from slides. But when it's Wikipedia and it's a definition, you kind of get a little bit of a pass on that. So here's my working definition as it applies to us. IT security is the process and mechanisms by which computer-based equipment, information, and services are protected from unintended or unauthorized access, change, or destruction. And it's really important, and it's growing in importance in line with increasing reliance on computer systems in most societies worldwide. So let's break this down. So some of the key points. First of all, processes and mechanisms. You have a lot of people that sometimes think IT security and they immediately start thinking the stuff, right? What is the stuff I need to buy, the equipment, the software, whatever. There's two sides to this. Those are mechanisms, but there's also processes because people are a big part of this equation. Second thing that I've highlighted is unauthorized access, change, or destruction. When we talk about IT security, people instantly start thinking about being hacked or ransomware, and that is a big, big concern. But it is not the only concern. And then finally, I don't think anybody's going to argue that we are absolutely more reliant on this than we were even just for a few years ago. It's hugely different when things go down now. If you have a system that goes down now versus even 10 years ago, it's a major difference in terms of how you have an ability to deliver patient care. So this is our working definition about IT security. It applies to everyone. We're focusing on processes and mechanisms, and it's a layered approach to stopping these threats. So let's talk about what these threats are. What are the common threats to IT security? First of all, viruses. All right, look, these things have been around longer than I have, right? Originally, it was designed, you have usually a disgruntled employee wants to go after a big employer, they infect their system, they release a virus, it creates havoc. But in reality, your system's down maybe for a couple of days. It's not the end of the world. It's irritating. It costs money because of downtime, but there's not a whole lot of legal ramifications to, the old school just virus. Hey, my system, I can't, blue screened and something like that. Now, malware is a whole different animal, and ransomware would be classified under malware. Malware is something where it used to be innocuous as ads that would be interjected into your browser, right? We all remember the old Internet Explorer, the search toolbars that, somehow you ended up with like 12 of them. Don't lie, I know you did, because I fix these things for a living, right? So we had that back in the day. Well, this has now evolved now to much more intense ransomware, and ransomware 2.0 in particular. So ransomware 1.0, where you basically download something, it goes through, it locks all your data. Now that sucks. That's a bad day. And they say, hey, we demand $30,000 worth of Bitcoin to this address in 72 hours. Otherwise, your data will forevermore be gone. Ransomware 2.0 takes something that's terrible and makes it even worse. Ransomware 2.0 says, hey, we've got your data. We locked it. Oh, and by the way, we downloaded a copy of it because we noticed this is sensitive information. So if you are a law firm, a government contractor, or anybody that's subject to HIPAA and has PHI on your system, this is a big deal. Because what they say is, not only will we not unlock this if you don't pay the ransom, but we're going to unlock it and sell it on the dark web. And now you have insult to injury, you have a massive data breach, there's all sorts of ramifications of that. You really don't want to mess with this. That's what we mean by malware. Hacking is somebody just brute forces into your system to be able to view or steal data. Most of the time, these two, hacking and malware, go hand in hand. User error. Here's one people don't think of, right? Why is it that this chart from the EMR just disappeared? Well, Susie accidentally deleted it. Well, that's a problem. That is a compromise of IT security. It's important that we have integrity in the records, and user error is one that people don't think of. Phishing. This is the classic. And here's the thing, I used to do this, and I almost did this tongue in cheek when I first put this presentation together like 10 years ago, because it was the Sultan of Abu Dhabi who lost his passport, who happens to be your long lost cousin. And by the way, if you could just help him out, he will reward you with 18 bazillion, whatever the coin of the realm is, once he gets back to the palace, right? And we've all gotten these things. Or, it's the Canadian drug pharmacy that's talking about things that I'm way too young to even worry about, stuff like that, right? That would all come through our email. The problem is this has really morphed. This is how people get malware, because it's morphed from, hey, it's the Sultan of Abu Dhabi, to now it's Chase Bank. And the login says, hey, we noticed some suspicious activity on your account. Click here to reset your password. And somebody clicks the link, right? This is where people get into trouble. And they've gotten really, really good at this. They will find the color code from Chase Bank Blue and they'll replicate it in that email. The fonts will be the same. The disclaimers will be the same. The shape of the tables and everything will all be the same. They're really, really good at this. And I used to tell people that, hey, what you need to do is before you click anything like that, just take your mouse and hover over the link. Because what that's going to do is it's going to expose where you're really going. Are you really going to Chase, or are you going someplace else? And of course, the challenge now is that is even a little bit more difficult, because a lot of people don't have the opportunity to click that link or to hover over that link before they click it. Any ideas why? Because they're doing it from here. And there's no way to verify that link before you click it on here. So when we talk about training staff, there's a couple of things that I always tell people. Number one, don't open critical stuff like that on your phone. Be aware. Number two, never do anything that you can't back up first with a phone call. That is, and number three, there is no sense of urgency. Nothing incredibly urgent that requires immediate action is going to be sent by a major organization over an email. There's time to process this. So phishing, shadow data. What on earth do I mean by shadow data? Shadow data, let's talk about your PHI, your protected health information, or employee information, or sensitive financial information, anything that's sensitive. When we work on your system, we build this little protective space, whether it's in a cloud services or an on-premise server or something like that. There's this protected space. And when you hire us and you say, hey, we need to keep this information safe, I'm going to build this little protective space. And I say, anything important goes in that box. And don't you dare take it out of that box, because I'm protecting the box. And then you go and you make a copy of it. Or you email a patient record to yourself. Or you download some pictures from some x-rays or something like that to a USB thumb drive. That's shadow data. It is critical information from a protected space. And that is a big threat to IT security. We had, I heard a case study of, it was actually an oral surgeon out in California. He did not want to have, he basically said, I do my own everything. And he just backed up all his information to a little USB hard drive and took it home at night. Okay, this is a terrible idea, but that's what he did. Stops at Publix grocery store on the way home. Goes into Publix, probably to pick up whatever his wife had texted him to pick up on the way home, because I'm sure I'm not the only guy on the planet who deals with that. And while he was in Publix, somebody stole his car. Now that sucks. But guess what was in that car? That hard drive that had all that patient information, because it was a backup from his office. Is that a data breach? Yeah, you bet it is. And that day just went from kind of crappy to absolutely terrible. And so shadow data is something to be aware of. System crash, kind of self-explanatory. Blue smoke comes out of the server or out of your switch, some critical component, all of a sudden the system's down and you hope you've actually got the data. And then just for all of my Florida friends, for which was my home state for about 7 years, natural disasters, fires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, teenagers, whatever. All of these things are natural disasters that can pose risks to your information. So how do we mitigate these risks? Now, are there other risks? Yes, but by and large, these 8 are the ones that affect a small to mid-sized practice, the people we're talking about. These are the ones you need to worry about. Now, interestingly enough, there are 3 entry points for failures of IT systems. Okay, first, your employees. Second, you, key personnel, you, practice administrator, office manager, and finally, the network itself, the IT components. Now, here's the thing. Everybody immediately, as we said, when they talk about IT failures, we immediately start talking about the network. What firewall do I need? How do I secure my Wi-Fi? And all these things are important. But here's the thing. If you have a properly managed network, statistically speaking, your threat vector looks like this. I'm the least of your worries. You have a better chance of compromising things than I do as your IT provider, and your employees have a much broader chance, or statistically speaking, a much larger chance of introducing some compromise than you do more than me. Now, this assumes a couple things. It assumes you have a properly managed network, and it assumes your key personnel have access that's different from employees. Some things are set up. But when you look at this is why I talk about processes and mechanisms. Everybody wants to talk about mechanisms, and that's important, and we will. But we really need to talk about what are the practical IT security measures for your employees and your key personnel, including you as well. So let's talk about that. First of all, what are some practical IT security measures for everyone? Secondly, for key personnel. And then finally, for your IT provider or your internal IT staff, if you're a hospital, a larger organization. So for everyone, you need to have cybersecurity training. There's plenty of providers out there. It is inexpensive. It's not hard. And by the way, it is required by HIPAA. And even if it wasn't, I guarantee you, if you have a cyber liability rider on your insurance policy, you better believe they're going to require this. You need to have need to know access policies. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you've got Susie, the assistant, and you've got Steve, who works at the front desk. Does Susie, the assistant, need the ability in your practice management and EMR to go in and modify my balance, my patient balance? No, of course not. Why would they need to do that? So if we want to protect the integrity of that record, Susie, the assistant, who enters clinical information, should not be modifying financial information. Conversely, Steve at the front desk, who works with patients to get their balance, should Steve be able to modify anything in the EMR, particularly clinical notes? Absolutely not. You'd be amazed how many practices we work with when they go through and do an audit where everybody basically has access to everything. This is something that needs to be addressed. You need to have an acceptable use policy. What does that mean? It is a document that's part of their employees' employment agreement that basically says, here's what you can and cannot do on these computers, which I own. They're owned by the practice. You have zero reasonable expectation of privacy. You don't even have an unreasonable expectation of privacy. You have no expectation of privacy whatsoever. These are our computers. This is our patient information we are protecting. And when you go on Facebook, you are putting it at risk, and I will fire you because of it. I know it sounds draconian, but again, these are simple, practical things where you can say, look, you're not going to be on Facebook. My personal pet peeve, LinkedIn. Really, you're putting my information at risk by looking for a better job on company time while I'm paying you to not do the job that you're supposed to be doing anyway? So yeah, it just really, there's no place for this. Talk to them about this is what's acceptable. This is what's not. It's for our practice management, EMR, and company use. Utilize guest Wi-Fi. Anything that comes in, unless it specifically needs access to protection, goes on the guest Wi-Fi. And no non-business web usage. Just tell your staff, no. Use your phone on the guest Wi-Fi, use your phone on cellular, that's fine. But you don't ever use company computers to look at Facebook Marketplace to pick up a new phone. All right, key personnel, you and your office manager. And I'm about to wrap up. I'm going as fast as I can. Quarterly audit of users and systems and key business applications. Super important. Who has access to everything? Who has access to what, and should they? Utilize secure remote access. If you are using an on-premise system where the data is housed in your office, you need to make sure you have secure access. If you're using a cloud system, you need to make sure that any workstation you're using to access, like a cloud-based EMR, are really secured and that your connection is secured. No, do not just sit down at a Starbucks, use their free Wi-Fi, and log into your bank and your EMR. Tether to your phone. It's okay to do that. It doesn't cost much, and it's easy. Limit social media to business purposes is an important one. For your IT provider, they need to have an excellent local tech staff available to your entire team in your area, period. Do not get sucked up into one of these, oh, we're a nationwide, we can do everything, because what they're going to do is when you need somebody on site, which inevitably happens, they're going to go computer subcontracting thing and hire an unemployed guy and pay him $50. That real recipe for disaster. They're compliant with regulatory consideration. Not only do they need to help you be compliant, but they need to make sure that they're compliant. You have a cyber of at least $1 they have it. And core standard network practices. What are the core 9 standard network practices, Brian? I'm so glad you asked. I've got a really cool slide that specifically addresses that. First of all, you need to have a next generation firewall in your office. This is the one that prevents people from going to Facebook, prevents people from going to a site in Russia that's CHAES.com instead of CHASE.com when they think they're going to Chase. A firewall, next generation firewall. You need to have secure and monitored Wi-Fi. Guest access for everybody, completely segmented from anything in that protected area. You need to have managed and antivirus, anti-spyware. Your data needs to be encrypted. If you have PHI sitting in your practice, it needs to be encrypted. End of story. You need to make sure that your systems are patched, whether it is Windows or Mac OS. It does not matter. It needs to be patched consistently. And most importantly, you need to be able to provide proof that it was, that the patches are being applied. Because in the event that you do have a HIPAA audit by HHS, one of the things they're going to ask is, can you show us the records where your systems were updated and current? If you have a breach, that's absolutely going to be one of the things that they ask. And your insurance carrier is going to be very keen on as well. You need to have vendor management. We have so many apps that talk to other apps that integrate with these. Everybody thinks they're just going to call you and have them log into your system and give us to everything, right? We see this on our phones and everything like that. When it comes to protecting, the information in that space, whether it's in your office or in the cloud, you need to have an IT company that's actually coordinating with these vendors and saying, whoa, wait a minute. What are you taking? And by the way, do you have a business associate agreement that names this practice? Because if not, I'm not opening up crap for you. And it's really important that you have somebody that is part of what your IT company should be doing. They should also be doing ticketing and event logging. Every time we touch a customer system, we create a log. It is no different than when a patient presents at your office and you write a narrative of exactly what happened and it's a legal record. That needs to be done as well for your IT system. You need to have a really solid backup and disaster recovery. I would argue that you need a business continuity solution. If you have on-premise data, if you're using a server or some other sort of local storage, you need to have a backup that can spin up. It's usually called a BDR, that can sit there and take over in the event something happens to that server. If you are entirely cloud-based, you need to have redundant internet connections. Your big fancy system and then like a cheap backup DSL so you can hobble along if something happens. And we already talked about the importance of local engineers. Now, these are the core 9. When it comes to designing your network, protecting your infrastructure, this is an example of what we do, but this is kind of the standard of care. This needs to be done by a professional at your practice. You need to also make sure that you are addressing those other barriers to entry, and I'll go back to that slide, for your key personnel, for everyone, and then for your IT provider. By the way, if you want copies of these slides, I can get you a PDF that has a summary and some action steps and whatnot. You can just ask afterward. All right. That's everything. Now, the real question is, what if you ignore all of Brian's advice and you don't have time or you just don't care and something happens? Then what? Well, I'm so glad, because the second half of this presentation is about exactly that. What is the liability and what are the implications if you do have some sort of event? Before I turn it over, I want to reiterate, this is not a scare session, right? Everybody here is trying to educate you on not only, hey, this is what can happen, but for my part, these are some practical steps to make sure that it never happens to you in the first place. I've been doing this almost 20 years now. We've worked with over 3,000 practices across about 8 states. If you take practical steps, you're going to be just fine. All right, gentlemen, back to you.
Nice, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Here, I will get started on this. Here we go.
And Brian, did you take down your PowerPoint, Brian?
I'm doing that right now.
There you go. Okay, perfect.
There you go.
Okay, can you guys see mine? No.
Yes, I can see yours. Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start the slideshow from the beginning. Fantastic. There we go. All right, guys. Good evening. Thank you, Brian. That was fantastic, because that actually helped me cover about half of the stuff that's on my slide. So we're really going to focus in on the legal and the legal consequences of what's going to regarding cybersecurity and the issues that it causes. So with that said, just a brief introduction. My name is Ben Mirza. I am actually an attorney practicing for about 20 years. I've practiced inside large size health system, small size practice groups. We have a healthcare law practice that Ed Meyer and Komal Mirza are also attorneys in the same firm, and we work together with clients and help get things done. And Ed, you want to actually go into a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ed Meyer. I am of counsel to Mirza Health Law Partners. And I've been practicing law for about 30 years, all in the healthcare regulatory area. Most recently, I was at Mednex there in Sunrise, Florida, but working out of their, handling their Midwest in Texas. But I've worked with physicians in the healthcare regulatory matter, large groups, national groups with hospital systems in the small hospitals, and actually even worked at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services during the Reagan administration as an appointee. I am a California licensed attorney. And so I provide assistance to Ben and his niece, Coleman Berza, who I understand is listening in on this.
And actually, Como is also an attorney too. So,
And
all
also
right.
an attorney, yes,
Yeah.
our associate.
So with that said, the first example, well, just keep in mind, today's session is for educational purposes. It's not intended to be legal advice. So if you do have a specific question, please do call us and and discuss it in detail with us over the phone. Our initial consults are always free. So anyway, with that said, let's get started on the actual what's happening. Recently, there was one institution that had a $500 laptop, because hardware nowadays is fairly cheap, and the $500 laptop turned into a $1.5 million laptop. And the way it did that was because, much like what Brian's story was, which is the data was on this laptop, the laptop got lost on a train because the employee happened to hop on a train and leave it behind. Somebody got a hold of it. Then internally, when they reviewed what was actually on that laptop and what was disclosed, or what went out to the open public, they had to go and disclose it to the Department of Health and Human Services. When they did that, the OCR reviewed their disclosure. Remember, this is a self-disclosure, and they fined the institution $1.5 million. And they did that because all of those 9 things that Brian was talking about, they were lacking those. So keep in mind that those 9 things are important, because they're going to keep the $500 laptop close to a $500 laptop. If you don't do them, it's going to turn it into a $1.5 million laptop. So those 9 things are hugely important. Just as we do all of our seminars, and we always talk about actually market forces a bit, Brian had actually touched on this, but just to kind of make sure that you understand it, that in this day and age, technology is coming at us from all angles. We've heard about robots that are carrying your medication, delivering it to a particular room inside a hospital. Soon it's going to be happening on your front door. There's going to be PHI going on that robot, on that delivery mechanism, on that drone. That's going to have PHI on it. So it's hugely important to actually keep abreast of these changes that are occurring. Also, remember, keep in mind, much like the natural forces that are in play, kind of like entropy, and I'm going to butcher this one up, but there are natural forces in play. Humans like to click, 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 and that's how errors happen. Information has a tendency to get set free. And when it gets set free, it becomes accessible by other people. So when you have to fix these things, they become costly experiences, and we're going to walk you through how to handle those. So today's seminar session, my part of it is really about 20-25 minutes. And first, we're going to talk about the federal regulators and what they've been up to for the last decade or so. And then we're going to talk about the legal and the industry regulations that are in place. The third thing that we're going to barely touch on is the safeguards that I think Brian had actually covered quite a bit of. But fourth, and most importantly, we're going to be talking about what to do when things go awry, when there is a breach. What do you do? Step 1, step 2, step 3. We're going to go through those steps, and that's going to be the most important slide. So make sure you stick around for that.
And one thing I want to mention too on market forces is the regulation are market forces, right? So we have new regulations coming down on as of July 1 regarding interoperability, encouraging and requiring interoperability. But as Brian mentioned very briefly though, is that safeguarding information from malware and hacking and access is done via segmenting, or segmenting everything out. So not everything's interoperable. So that actually sort of raises the risk within the healthcare field. There are ways to deal with it, especially in the backup, because I just want to mention real quickly, when those interoperability rules do not apply to backups. So you may make sure your backup systems are segmented out as a further safeguard.
Good point. That's a good point, Ed.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's see what the federal feds have been up to. So since 2003 to present, as of March 31st, 2021, the Office of Civil Rights, OCR stands for Office of Civil Rights, investigated close to 260,000 complaints. And of those 260,000 complaints, they actually referred out 1,060 of them to the DOJ for criminal investigation or prosecution purposes. And that's a fair amount. Now, what they've also done as of March 31st, 2021, is that they've also collected $135 million. That's a lot of money, people. Now, when it comes to penalties, the penalties that they can assess is anywhere from $100 to $50,000 per violation being each record or each patient's records that are put at risk is deemed one violation. So multiply that. Now, keep in mind that there is a statutory cap of $1.5 million, which I believe has inched up due to the inflationary issues, and it's roughly sitting at $1.7 million is the maximum cap. Now, the OCR will also warn you that the things that are happening most often that are causing these sorts of fines to take place is a lack of access and access safeguards, that there are no access safeguards in place, no administrative safeguards in place, that there is disclosure of more than just the minimum necessary information. These are the kinds of things that actually Brian was touching upon a little while ago. And if you actually follow that protocol, you're going to be able to steer clear of some of these and minimize it. The other thing that they also say, the Office of Civil Rights, is that that the types of entities that are paying the highest fines, the ones that are paying the highest fines are general hospitals, number one. Number two, it's private practices. So that could be the smaller practices that we're talking about. The other thing is there's also outpatient facilities, and there are pharmacies and health plans. Now, keep in mind that 58%, meaning nearly 60% of malware attacks happen on small businesses. Now, these are actual statistics, dollars, and dates. So, and that's the lay of the land. So when it comes to actually industry regulations, keep in mind that HIPAA and HITECH were recently modified as of January 2021. What this most recent bill stated is that if an entity can demonstrate that they've adequately safeguarded or used security practices in their place for over 1 year, that may be grounds to ask for mitigation of fines. So that's a really key and important thing. And I think Brian had touched on it, but let me just emphasize it here, that change as of January 2021 is a really important change. Now, the next thing that you want to look at is what are they actually benchmarking a security, cybersecurity system against? Well, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has come up with the standards. As of 2015, they'd set the standards for this. And it's basically a wheel. It's like a framework wheel. You start off with identification of devices. You move on to protection, meaning like, is there some sort of protection protocol in play? Is there detection capabilities in the system? Is the entity responding to these incidents that are occurring? And what do they have planned in terms of recovery? So that's the 5-prong wheel that they're going to benchmark your practice against once it does get hacked. And this is going to become important as we touch on the last slide. So keep in mind, what we also do with our clients is we actually help them review their cybersecurity and HIPAA policies. So we go through the whole thing, like Brian was talking about. We'll help them establish policies regarding education, awareness, training, the roles and responsibilities of the different groups within your practice. We also help you establish policies regarding data classification, use of personal devices, and so forth. So policies is what Ed, Komal, and I do. If you need any help on that, please do call us and reach out to us.
Yeah, one thing I mentioned about training, and I know Brian sort of touched on this, the importance of training your employees, but not just training them, but then sort of testing them. Send them, a false phishing email to see if they click on it, and that way you kind of know whether that was hardwired. It's a way to test whether the education was hardwired, because if they click on it, then okay, we need a little more education on and more focus. Plus, it also really gets. Then you tell them, hey, you clicked on this fake phishing one we sent to you, therefore you need more education, and two, it keeps them much more aware of that. So it's
Yeah.
an interactive training, actually, in a way.
Actually, Ed, there's a whole industry, I think, based around
Yeah.
the whole testing from the outside, right? So
Yeah.
people will test. You can actually hire companies that will come in and test the points of penetration where they can get into your system. And I think Brian will, when we wrap back up, Brian will probably touch upon that. So now mitigating safeguards, right? These are the things in place that the OCR is looking for. This is what we as attorneys would use as a defense to minimize the charges or to minimize the fines that would occur. And what we're looking for is to be able to explain to the OCR is that there was a cybersecurity policy in place, that there was an email protection plan in place, that there were endpoint and access management safeguards put together, that there was an asset and a network management system. There was vulnerability management and testing, like what Ed was just talking about, that there were people that were testing the system, and that we do have an incident response system. If we're able to explain that, show this to the OCR, and then that becomes the basis for mitigating the fines that they would charge us. Now, last but not least, I do want you to consider cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is a real practical way to help offset some of the costs. And you're going to see them come up here in just a few minutes as to how expensive a cyber attack can be on a business. So cyber insurance is a nice policy to have, and you should seriously consider buying it if you don't have one already. And if you have bought it, do make sure that you review it, so that you've complied with all of its requirements. Okay, so last but not least, this is the slide that I actually wanted to go into. So let's say that your system gets hacked, somebody comes into it, they breach, a data breach actually takes place. Well, what I always tell a friend of mine used to always say this, and he used to always say, when stuff hits the fan, you better call in your money, guns, and lawyers. And this is one of those situations. When a data breach occurs, what do? The first thing you do is you reach out for your technology guns. You call in your technology experts and you have them assess the situation. Next thing you do is you call in your attorneys, because now you got to figure out how you're going to handle it, disclose it, and all that sort of stuff, right? And then the third thing is get ready, because this may affect you in more than just expenses. It may cost you in terms of downtime. The money that you lose in terms of downtime can be really, really expensive. So that's the money component of it. Don't just look at it as what's got to get spent, but look at it as the money that you weren't able to earn when the systems go down. So going into step 2, which is the data breach. You've got to assess the data breach. Was the data breach a ransomware 1.0 or a 2.0? If it was a 1.0.
It's a real mention that Ben and I were talking earlier today about this, is that 1.0 is they've locked your system. They may not have your data, but they may be able to lock you out. So for example, let's just use a practical situation. You have an office, you have just simply physical files. Someone walks over from the outside and locks your office from the outside, and you cannot get in, but they put a note, I'll give you the key to open your door. you give me money. Well, your data hasn't been breached. Your office has been locked. But instead, if they've broken in and they've gotten your files and they've locked you out of your system, that's a whole different story. So it's just really important to, which is why, first call your technology guys to figure out what's actually happened. Do they have your data, or have they simply locked you out of getting your data?
And then what else is also important is your backups, right? Are your backups also an issue? Did your backups get locked up too? So that's going to make a huge difference in how the technology guys will deal with this data breach. In terms of restoring you, getting you back to being operational. So yeah, these are really important things to look at. And also you want to look at whether the data was encrypted. Like what Brian said earlier, encryption is not even an issue. You got to encrypt just about everything that is considered PHI. Not just about everything that is PHI. So if it's encrypted, that is your get out of jail card when it comes to the Office of Civil Rights. That's what you got to do. You got to encrypt your data. That's gonna save you a whole lot of issues. But before you move on to actually consider whether you're going to pay an entity or not pay an entity, pay for the ransom, you want to be careful that you don't trip other wires. What if the entity that is asking you to pay the ransomware happens to be on the terrorist watch list? If it's on the terrorist watch list and you pay them, you're triggering a whole other set of federal statutes. You got to be careful of that. So that's when you'd call up people like Ed and I, and we would help you walk through as to what needs to happen. So then you would actually got to report it to the FBI or the Secret Service. Both branches actually have a department that deals with this stuff. So you got to report the event. Ed, you want to add some stuff?
Yeah. We're mad at it because there's the federal government is criminal to provide money to terrorists if they're on the terrorist list, or if they're an organization that's been sanctioned or blocked, designated nationals and blocked persons. There's actually a list that you could check, that can be checked, and to send money to those people can be a big problem, legally and criminally, which is why you contact the FBI and contact the Secret Service. They have special sites for that, to let them know that you've been hacked and you've been having a ransomware attack. And because if for some reason you end up having to pay that ransom to get your business going, that they may view it differently than if you paid it without having been notified. Plus, also, it's very possible that the FBI could actually have the key because they've dealt with the same set of folks before. It's very possible. You maybe not, but what the heck? Talk with them, get a hold of them if you can. Obviously they're probably pretty busy right now with these things, but that's an important aspect.
So now let's say you've come to the conclusion that the person or the individual that's asking for ransom is not on the actual terrorist watch list. Let's say you decide to now pay for that data. Then you got to hope for that the restoration takes place and it's proper. I was speaking with some of the folks from over at Advantage Technology, and they walked me through it. So how often is it that it's hard to save the hardware as well as the software on these devices, and you got to really just get the right technology guns to help you restore your data. You may not be able to recover all of it. You may actually have missing parts of it. Some of it may have gotten corrupted. So the restoration, yeah, it's great that you can restore, but sometimes it's really not possible. So that's where you get the technology folks involved. Then the next thing where Ed and I get involved is what you got to now report this breach, right? So you got to report the breach and you got to take certain steps at it. So number one, the first thing that everybody has to do is when a data breach occurs of PHI and it's non-encrypted data that's been sent out into the real world, into the outside world, you have to notify each person whose records were compromised. And it has to be a notice by US mail. So imagine the cost and the expense of that, right? Imagine the mailers, imagine and it's got to go first class mail. So it's not like your bulk mail at 28 cents, it's going to be a 52-cent per stamp, plus all of the other things. So imagine if you've got thousands of patients on there. That's a costly endeavor. This is why you want to have cyber insurance, because you want to be able to help recover some of these costs with it. Now, keep in mind, if there are 500 or more records that have been compromised, you got to do a media notification too. So now you have to not only send that letter, but you also have to announce it to the rest of the world on a media that, you know, your records were compromised. Last but not least, you also have to notify DHHS, DHHS being Department of Health and Human Services, and you have to notify them within 60 days. If you have a breach of 500 or more records, then you got to notify them ASAP. So that's going to be your reporting requirements. When you do actually disclose it to them, you're going to go into a portal, and in the portal, you're going to fill out all of these questions they're going to have. And they're going to ask you everything that we just walked through, which is, how did it happen? Where did it happen? What policies do you have in place? What did you do to mitigate these sets of circumstances? How many people were at issue? They're going to ask you a whole set of nitty-gritty questions. If you actually need a copy of what that questionnaire looks like, I've got a copy of it. Email me and I'll get it to you. And then what's going to happen is DHHS is going to take your self-disclosure, and they're going to, inquire, review, investigate as to what actually happened. And then you have to wait on their findings. So you don't want to be like that laptop, that company that owned that $500 laptop that had unencrypted information on there and turned into a $1.5 million fine. If something like that happens, so you just want to make sure that at least your laptop was encrypted, so you don't have all that data sitting out in this big wide world. So these are the 5 key steps that you would need to take, and that's how you do it. And you call up, your technology team. You call up your lawyers, and that's how you deal with the situation. Yeah. It's everybody holds hands and walks through.
But
anything else you want to touch on?
I was going to say, the bottom line, a lot of the stuff is prevention. Doing things before this all happens, having those policies in place, talking to your technology guys, getting this in place, having a backup system, backing it up, and then that backup's encrypted, that backup's desegmented, and the backup's done often, so that if let's say you do get locked out, you're able and you have it set aside so that your backup is not being hacked or being disrupted, then you're able to get back your business moving forward really quickly. But again, a lot of this is like, if you're just sort of ignoring the situation and say, well, you know what, I'm out of sight, out of mind. You never know, because you're a physician group. All these guys are physician groups, and you're linked in with a hospital. The hospitals are bigger targets, as we know, but then that big target with a hospital can infect you all. It's very, very possible that especially if you're hospital based, you have systems that might be hooked up to the hospital system. You have emails that you might be on the hospital email system. So it's just real important to have your own set of policies well in advance and take these steps. And as Brian explained earlier, there's so many just security steps you could take that really aren't that costly for practice. But they're just sort of the way now that everyone's using electronic data is we just have to view the world differently and work in a different manner. That's all I wanted to say.
Brian, do you have any questions about data security, policies, what should be in a policy, or a breach that occurs? We're here to help you. You're welcome to call us and pick our brains for free, or actually engage us should the circumstances necessitate that. Any questions? Brian, you want to circle back in?
The thing that really comes to mind that I tell people all the time is that we've all heard the adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in reality, in this case, an ounce of prevention is worth a 2-ton gorilla worth of cure. An incredible amount that can be avoided with just some simple practical steps. I know I've kind of hammered that point home, but it's because I really believe it. And it's really, really important. If you look at cases, people are subject to fines, whether they're even just the investment of having to about access that you breached and everything like that. The vast majority of the time, there's just things scratch our heads like, really, like it didn't need to be that way. And just encourage you, take practical steps because it'll pay huge dividends.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Anything else, Charles?
You're muted. Yeah. Charles, you're muted.
Right. You can check my website, South Florida Hospital News and Healthcare Report. In one of the links, you'll see upcoming events. To check out our upcoming events between networking and education events. We will have another legal seminar in the month of August, probably about mid-August. We haven't figured out the exact date, but it'll be probably the second or third week in August. We also have a mental health networking event coming up towards the end of this month, and you'll see it in the upcoming events. And we also have a regular networking event for healthcare professionals coming up in 2 weeks. So for those who are interested in attending, check my website out, and we'd be glad to help you out and meet some new people. And with that, I bid everybody a good evening, and hopefully everybody's learned something. This will be posted to our website and on Ben's website for people to review, or if you know somebody who should know about this information and was not able to come, you can send them the link. Thank you, Ben, Ed, and Brian, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.